Hey everyone, Jonathan Baylor here, and welcome to another bonus Smarter Science of Sloan podcast. And today is definitely going to be a fun day and a fun recording because we have a woman who just brings awesome perspective and awesome energy to the food quality movement. She is the proprietor and founder of the awesome website, theclothesmakethegirl.com. She is the author of the wonderful recipe book, Well Fed, and she is also the co-author of Living Paleo for Dummies. Melissa Julian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be talking to you today.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. Well, Melissa, one of my favorite parts of your website is actually your story because you've structured it in a way that is as unique and awesome as your personality and your personal brand is in general. Your about section, your little numbered list there. I love that. Can you take us through your story a bit?
Sure, I'd be glad to. It's funny, when it came time to write my about page, I was like, I'm not really sure how to make all of this into a cohesive story, so I'm just going to have to make a list because there are elements that look conflicting, but if you know me, that kind of all makes sense. So I think number one on my list is probably that I was an overweight and obese kid, even though I'm 45 now. That makes a huge impact, and I feel like my whole life has kind of been somewhat in reaction to that. Um, so I started out not athletic at all, and my family ate very healthy food, but we ate a lot of food because my dad owned a restaurant and my mom is a wonderful cook. I explained in my cookbook she won every cooking contest she ever entered. So our whole family was really built around cooking together, and we had dinner together every night between 5 and 6 until we graduated from high school. I mean, it was very traditional kind of family feeling around the table. And then when I graduated from college, I decided that I really wanted to get in shape, so I started exercising regularly for the first time in my life. And I was pretty successful. I lost a lot of weight, but then even keeping my good habits, I started to gain that weight back. It was very frustrating. And I repeated that cycle several times over the next, say, 15 years. So I would find a way of eating that worked for a while, and even though I stuck with it and I continued to exercise, I would eventually gain some of the weight back. And then when I was approaching my 40th birthday, I decided that I really wanted to get serious. And I had hung up my roller skates from being a roller girl. Yeah, I used to play flat track roller derby. And I needed some physical challenge to take the place of roller derby, and I started doing CrossFit. And when I found CrossFit, I also found the Zone diet and started doing that and was very, very successful for a while. And then the weight started creeping up a little bit again, and that's when I found paleo, which has been wonderful. It's been about 4 years since I switched to a fairly strict paleo diet, which means I don't eat grains, dairy, legumes, added sugar. I drink very rarely. I don't eat any packaged food. And that has changed so many aspects of my life. It's crazy. My sleep improved. My mental clarity is much sharper. I just feel happier. I feel pretty optimistic when I wake up in the morning. And when I first started, I definitely experienced some fat loss, which was great. And then a few months later, I found out that I had a thyroid nodule, and it was so large that it couldn't be tested with a needle biopsy, and I had to have it removed. So since then, my commitment to the paleo diet has not only been because of vanity, because I do want to be as lean as possible, but also my health really requires it now. One of the huge benefits of the paleo diet is that it reduces inflammation. And for someone with a thyroid condition who is, or if you are taking thyroid hormones, you need to do everything you can to help those thyroid hormones work properly. So for me, that means I really have to watch what I eat so that I can track how I'm feeling and make sure that my thyroid medication is the right dose. Because the thyroid symptoms are very similar to how I feel if I eat gluten or if I eat too much sugar. So the only way to tell if I feel crappy for a legitimate reason is to keep my diet really clean.
You're minimizing variables there a little bit, it sounds like.
Exactly. I feel like in the last 4 years since I had my thyroid removed, I've gotten really adept at like the whole idea of self-experimentation and N equals 1. And you really can't do any of that experimentation until you get foundation laid, which is solid nutrition, restful sleep, stress management, and then you can start playing with the other variables. But if you don't have those things nailed down, then you just don't know what you're dealing with.
And they may, ironically, they may actually be making a difference, but the difference is masked because you have all this interference from other areas that you never really, you give up on something which may actually make dramatic benefit if those other variables were under control.
Yes, that's absolutely right. It's very frustrating, but in a way, it's also been very good for me because my whole life I was one of those people that was, a goal setter and a plan maker and point me on a path, and I will pedal to the metal, go until like crash into that goal. And this has taught me that it doesn't actually work that way. Life's not actually linear because even when you get all of the variables figured out, there are other things going on. There are other environmental issues around you. There's aging, I'm not 35 anymore, so things are a little different. So it's all fascinating.
Oh, it absolutely. And the one thing I wanted to dig into, Melissa, because I love what you just said there. You go at things head on, and I love that. I mean, your catchphrase, I don't know, for lack of better terms, on your website is train hard, or maybe this is more of a vision or a mission statement: train hard, eat clean, and live loud. So I bet when you were doing you mentioned you did the zone diet and achieved some success there. I'm curious as to when you were going full speed ahead with the zone diet. What are the biggest differences you see between a zone type diet and a paleo type lifestyle? And could you combine them? Could you just eat paleo foods in more of a zone framework, or talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So when I originally started doing the zone, I was doing it grain free, not because of any understanding really of what grains can potentially do to your body. But because in the zone, you could have 2 tablespoons of rice or 3 cups of broccoli. And I like to eat. I like to have big piles of food on my plate. So I didn't eat the grains because I just wanted to eat more volume, honestly. And the zone worked really well for me for a while. I think the biggest challenge was that when I started doing a lot more CrossFit training, and I was also running, and there were some days I was doing double workouts, I had to increase the fat that I was eating. So I was actually on I doubled the amount of fat in the zone. And that worked pretty well. I think, and now, honestly, the way I eat paleo is much more balanced. It is 40-30-30, but I do 40% fat, 30% carbs, 30% protein. The thing that is tricky, I think, about the paleo framework is that it's just that. It's a framework of getting started and kind of eliminating foods that can be problematic. But then once you've done that, you kind of have to play with your macronutrients because for a lot of women, we need to have more carbs. The general advice usually if you want to get lean with a paleo diet is to go low carb, higher protein and fat. But for women who do high intensity exercise, or if you have thyroid issues, or you have any kind of adrenal issues, or, I just completely lost what the 4th thing was going to be. This is why, because I'm old. If you are trying to get pregnant, you might need a little bit higher percentage of carbohydrates. If you're a dude in your 20s who's tearing through CrossFit workouts, you can sit and drink a can of coconut milk at your desk every day. So the framework is really meant to be played with. And I think that for me, almost equal, 40-30-30-ish approach works really, really well. And so I do kind of follow a little bit that zone-ish mentality of eating protein and carbs and fat together. But I always make sure they're paleo foods in those buckets of zone macronutrients.
Oh, and I love what you say there, Melissa, in the sense that I think the paleo, in some ways, paleo is almost, it's only one of many ways we could refer to this type of lifestyle, right? One could also just describe it as the eat only things you could find directly in nature that do not have things that block the body from absorbing other nutrients. Basically.
Yes. And you should make an acronym of that.
Well, it's in some ways, or a shorter version is eat stuff that have the most good and the least bad. Which is almost like obvious, but that is a lot of dietary recommendations don't do that. They're eat that which is most profitable for the agriculture industry, or eat that which has the funnest cartoon character on the outside of the package. But what I love what you said is how once you take that, like that is in many ways the foods that you can start with, but then how you allocate them and the various ratios, that's what you need to play with. And it's not a mutually exclusive thing. It's really a both and, it seems.
Yes. And again, it's all influenced by whatever you might be going through at the time. Like right now, my husband and I are super busy working on our next book, and our days are really different than they were a month ago. A month ago, I had a pretty slow schedule and I sat and wrote most of the day. Now I have 12-hour days where I'm on my feet all day. I'm physically tired at the end of the day, and I'm kind of stressed because we're working on the book. So I have to eat and rest and meditate and exercise to support that, not be in conflict with that. So I think, this whole lifestyle kind of teaches you to be a little more fluid and a little more conscious of the other things that are going on in your life. And I feel like that could be a little overwhelming for someone who's just trying to get started. So I will say for people who are considering making a switch in their nutrition and eating those, just real foods that, are good for your body and don't do any harm, just start with that. Just like get rid of the junk first. And then little by little, you can start playing with the other variables. But if you get rid of the junk first, you're like 85% of the way there.
I think that's such a great piece of advice, Melissa, because with a lot of these things, if you start like go do like super clean, and then you can start to add stuff back, and you can start to see. I mean, maybe you are one of those fortunate individuals who can do a little bit better with dairy. I mean, there's some people that dairy might make them go bananas, and there's some people where even fruit, like for example, myself personally, I noticed dramatic enhancements in both how I feel and how I look when I went. Basically a complete elimination of fruit other than before and immediately after heavy resistance training workouts, and increasing my more of my healthy fats. So doing a sort of a carb fat swap. But I know there are people that have just the opposite experience.
Mm-hmm. We're all special snowflakes.
Well, and Melissa, one thing I wanted to, speaking of special snowflakes, one thing I wanted to rewind and touch on a little bit, which is a little bit more somber of a subject, but you mentioned something, and the phrase you use, the phraseology you use, is I actually think very, very profound. And you said something along the lines of you felt that you lived much of your life in reaction to struggling with your weight and how you felt about your appearance when you were younger. Mm-hmm. And with what we see with, I believe the statistic now is over 40 million children under the age of 5 are overweight, and I don't know if people yet understand that is not that is a you don't give children cigarettes because you know that it would do permanent damage to them, but some of these other foods that are sometimes given to children in their very schools are doing permanent damage to them. Could you talk a little bit about that permanent damage?
Yeah, I mean, it's so complicated because our relationship with food is so complex and can be emotionally rich that it's really hard to tease apart all of those variables. One of the things that has always kind of been in conflict for me is that I love what food represented in terms of the feelings it kind of produced in me towards my family and that warmth around the table and the idea that you're feeding your body and you're also feeding your soul or your emotions. And I think that that's valid. Like, I don't ever want that to go away. And one of my biggest problems with traditional dieting is that I feel like to be successful with a traditional diet, you have to remove any feelings associated with the food, and you're just in the state of denial. You deny yourself things you like. You deny yourself potentially things that taste good, and you're just on this like austerity program to lose weight. And that's certainly not anything that you can sustain for any length of time. So one of the things that I loved about making the switch to paleo is that I feel like it's allowed me to enjoy food. At the same time, it's given food its proper place in my life, which is, it is sustenance for my body. I can feel that emotional connection to healthy, delicious food, but I don't have to cross that line into what I think of as really self-abuse, where you're either overeating or you're eating foods that aren't good for you. But to expect someone who's 10 or 12 or 14 to have the maturity to think through all of that is untenable. You know, kids don't think about stuff like that. They think about what tastes good to them in the moment, or they eat whatever's put in front of them. So it's pretty tough, because once you establish those connections with food, it's really hard to change them when you're older. I mean, I still think that what I really want on a Friday night is to order a pizza and lay on the couch and watch TV and eat half a pizza. And I will admit that for Super Bowl Sunday, we actually ordered a real pizza and I ate it. And, you know, it tasted good. It didn't taste as good as the memory of the times when I'd done that before, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I know that sounds a little like Pollyanna or whatever. It's the truth. It tasted good. It didn't taste significantly better than if I would have made my pizza pie recipe, which is a meat crust with vegetables on top of it. And the fallout then over the next 2 or 3 days certainly wasn't worth it, because the gluten makes me moody and depressed, and I got a pimple, and I was bloated, and my sleep was disrupted. And the thing that like most stood out to me in that is like, I don't beat myself up over that anymore. I ate something I shouldn't have. I won't do that again, you know? The thing that really stood out to me is that the sense memory is so powerful, and those get set when we're so young. So I wish I had the answer. I don't know what the answer is. And I can get outraged very easily, because I don't know if you saw the New York Times article a couple weeks ago about the chemistry involved in the junk food in this country. But the chemists, the food chemists, know what they're doing. Like, they know that this amount of fat and this amount of salt and this amount of sugar is going to make a food that not only doesn't make you feel satisfied, it actually makes you hungrier. And I was losing my marbles when I was reading that. I mean, I was screaming at my husband, like, they regulate cigarettes, they regulate alcohol, but you can walk into a school and buy a bag of Doritos out of the vending machine. And, you know, I think that there's room for Doritos in life, too. You know, I eat them once a year maybe because they do taste good. But there should be some kind of responsibility somewhere for not making those part of kids' diet every day.
What?
And now I'll get off my soapbox.
No. I'll jump right up there with you. No worries. It might collapse under the weight of both of us, because I think we'll both get up there. But one thing I really wanted to focus on, which you said, which is very profound, is this idea of the memory or the thought of doing something actually being more satisfying than the act of actually doing it, and how we can. I'm just thinking back to my own experience, right? I mean, this is only N of one, but we all have these soft spots in our hearts for foods that we enjoyed as children. And if, for example, if someone reads your cookbook, there's plenty of delicious, super healthy foods there, right? No question. So how much of a gift is it if some of those sense memories were for wholesome, wonderful foods?
Right.
And it's not a crazy thing. I mean, I think we've all, fruit might be a good example. Like, there may have been a time when we were thirsty and it was hot and we had like a freshly picked orange. And it was just like, oh my God, that was so good. And that food was great for you. So what if we could gift our children with those positive sense associations with food that will further and empower their lives rather than cripple their lives?
Yes. There's this new blogger that I just found. His name is Joshua, and his blog is called Slim Palate. And he's a teenager, and he was overweight, and he was getting kind of picked on at school, and he decided that he was going to change his life, and he started eating paleo, and he's in great shape now, and he started this blog where he shares his favorite recipes, and he takes the photos. It's beautiful. Like, I think about what I was like at 17. I'm like, how is this kid doing this stuff? It's so awesome. And the thing that really jumped out at me about him is that I did a little Q&A with him that I'm going to be publishing on my site. And one of the questions that I always ask people, which I think is really silly fun, is, it's Friday night. Nutrition doesn't matter. You can eat whatever you want. What would you have? And, my answer obviously is pizza and a movie. His answer was my braised short ribs recipe. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, he is really fortunate because he's right at the age where those pathways are kind of getting set, and he's setting his own for healthy food. His treat food was short ribs. Like, that's so cool. I was like, wow, he doesn't have the 18 years of junk food in his backpack that I do. I thought that was really great.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is such a profound, it really is a gift, right? Because I'm fortunate enough that I started my path of healthier nutrition really when I was in high school. And mine was really more predicated on wanting to optimize my athletic performance. And I remember really young, I remember when I was probably 13 or 14 thinking to myself, and this is actually I'm not saying this is the right thing for everyone to do by any means, right? This is what 13-year-old boy's logic was. We were at, here's a very distinct memory. I was at a football camp because I really wanted to play football, and I remember that they were going to bring in pizza for lunch, and I remember thinking to myself, okay, well, I have to eat. I brought in some tuna fish, a can of tuna, because it was hot and I didn't have a refrigerator. I brought in a can of tuna, and I brought in some raw vegetables in a baggie, and I was like, okay, well, I have to make sure that I eat those things because those are going to help me, and then I'll eat some pizza. And I noticed that I wasn't able to eat a lot of pizza, but I still ate it. But just even having that concept of you have to make sure you're taking in the good because it will help you. And then if you want to do other stuff on top of that, that's kind of your own prerogative. But having that baseline of nutrition and having that thought of food is rewarding beyond what it just tastes like in the moment, as you experience with the pizza, where something can be wonderful in the moment and then terrible afterwards.
Right.
And we've all experienced that in other areas of life, right? Where these short-term visceral pleasures can lead to longer-term not so good. And that doesn't mean we don't like visceral pleasures, and that doesn't mean we don't ever do anything enjoyable with our lives, but it's kind of a crude analogy. But just like there's a safe way to have sex and an unsafe way to have sex, and someone who has sex a safe way, we don't consider that person to be depriving themselves or stupid in some way. We're just well, that's kind of just common sense,
Yeah. One of the things that I thought of when you were telling your story is that I think kids who play sports are at an advantage to some degree. I think it's great because I think when you're doing athletic stuff, you start to make that connection between what you put in your body and how you feel. And that's not an experience that I had when I was younger. Mm-hmm. I didn't recognize that if I felt terrible, I could connect that to something that I'd eaten, mm-hmm. both emotionally and physically. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have some family members who follow the paleo diet, and I have some family members who don't. And when the family members who don't feel bad, I always wonder if it's because of something they ate. I wonder if they'd taken that thing out, would they feel better? But it's really difficult to make that connection when you haven't experienced it for yourself, and when you don't have the nutrition education. I surround myself with people who know a lot about nutrition and exercise, and I forget that most people still don't really understand how food affects them.
Absolutely. And once you do understand that, I think you then have a freedom that you don't have otherwise. And that's the key thing. Even with, we did the analogy with smoking and food earlier, and how smoking is regulated. And certainly no one is saying outlaw smoking. We just want to make sure that everyone is free in the sense that they're conscientious, or they've given informed consent if they choose to smoke. Meaning no one in this country smokes thinking it's doing something good for them or not understanding what it does to their lungs. And a similar thing, it would be, what we're talking about is really just doing the same thing for food. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone could understand what the food, quote unquote foods, because a lot of these things aren't even food, what the edible products are, actually doing to them so that they have the freedom. And because, like you talked about, there's addictive elements here, so that they have the freedom to make that choice. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing either, right? I mean, your book is
Right.
very, very appropriately titled Well Fed. Individuals who are eating foods found in nature that do as much good for you as possible and as little bad for you as possible are not hungry. And they're not like eating dry, tasteless, bland garbage. And they may even have a cheat day every once in a while. But it's all conscious.
Yes. I think that's the thing, that conscious decision. And one of the great gifts of starting to eat this way is that I have really learned the difference between emotional appetite and true hunger.
Mm.
And having that goes back to what you said about freedom. Like, I know I'm choosing to eat this bowl of popcorn right now. I'm not mindlessly shoveling it into my face. I decided I want to eat a bowl of popcorn. I know it's not because I'm hungry. It's because I want it. And there's a difference, and that's okay. You know, like, that is so powerful. And as a formerly, obese kid, to have that, like, calm to make the decision is really life-changing. And I think it's really hard to do that if you're caught in the sugar cycle of eating the kind of standard American diet where you're maybe not getting enough fat, you're definitely probably getting way too much sugar, and who knows if you're getting adequate protein, at all. So yeah, until you lay that foundation and clean up your thought processes, it's really hard to make smart decisions about food.
Absolutely. And even the baseline you were describing there of an individual who is being subjected to the standard American diet, I think oftentimes this idea of being satisfied, like we have to be satisfied. I do not believe, well, maybe, no, I do not believe an individual can go through life if their whole life feeling dissatisfied with what they're eating. But one thing I think is very underappreciated is when we eat these edible products, we have vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Like, we are literally deficient in things our body needs. And that has a profound effect on how satisfied we feel. And if we ever feel satisfied, like, we might just be chronically hungry, not because we're not taking in enough calories, because we may be eating 3, 4, 5,000 calories per day, but still not feeling satisfied because our body is craving essential things which it's not getting. So in some ways, feeling satisfied almost requires eating this type of nutrient-dense diet, ironically.
Yep, absolutely. And now I'm sad.
Why are you sad?
Well, I find it a little heartbreaking that there's so much potentially confusing information, particularly in mainstream publications and TV shows. So even people who say, I'm starting today, I'm going to make healthier choices, and I'm going to take better care of myself, but they're potentially turning to sources that don't have the best information. And so in trying to take care of themselves, they're actually doing some damage because they're eating whole grains, and they're eating tofu instead of red meat, and they're eating canola oil instead of saturated fat and coconut oil and grass-fed butter. And it makes me a little sad. We're all trying to get the word out there, and we're doing a pretty good job, but it's slow going.
Well, and I think, Melissa, though, one thing you should smile very much about, because you are doing this as an individual, and I know you're inspiring others to as well. And I say this a lot on the podcast, but it means a lot to me, and that's being the change you want to see in the world. Because at the end of the day, results are going to win out, right? Like people are going to notice, like, wow, Melissa is always happy, and she's 140, and like what. And then people are just gonna be like, wow, I mean, like that works. And I think that is just such an important thing, because every day I seem to meet more and more people who are in their mind redefining what healthy means, simply because the quote unquote healthy way of living makes them feel sick.
Yeah.
And we have to essentially make healthy again, which is a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, it is.
Well, Melissa, turning to more positive subjects here, what's next for you? I know you said mentioned you're working on a new book. What else is coming down the runway?
On a personal note, I'm pretty excited right now because I spent the last about year and a half dealing with some adrenal fatigue that was a result of having my thyroid removed and not really knowing how to take care of myself after I had my thyroid removed. So I've been on this almost a year and a half now of lots of self-experimentation, messing around with supplements, and really changing how I work out. For a while, I couldn't work out at all, which was terrible. But the good news is that I just went to my doctor, and all of my numbers look awesome, which is great because I've been feeling good, but I wanted to make sure that my blood work was representing that. So we're finishing up this book, and then we're going on a 6-week trip to Europe. And then when I get home, I'm going to make a whole new kind of workout, nutrition, lifestyle plan now that I'm not doing rehab on my adrenal system anymore. And I'm super excited about that.
Wow, that sounds awesome. 6 weeks in Europe. That is epic.
Yeah, so we got some really good stuff coming up.
Okay.
It's gonna be challenging to not eat gluten while I'm because we're going to the Czech Republic, Slovenia, and Croatia, which you can find vegetables and lots of pork, which is great in the Czech Republic. But there's also dumplings and schnitzel and the best beer in the world. So yeah, I'm gonna be doing that 80-20 rule a lot.
Absolutely. Well, Melissa, I really, really appreciate you sharing both personal and scientific sentiment with us today, because I think, that's what it's all about here, is making sure we're in touch with the science, but also bringing things back to being practical, because at the end of the day, right, food isn't just science. There's a lot more to it. So I really appreciate you willing to share that with us.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. It was fun.
Oh, everyone. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. And everyone, if you haven't checked out Melissa's work, please do. I think she brings an awesome perspective and a very unique and cool aspect to this dialogue. And if you haven't checked her work out, please do at theclothesmakethegirl.com. And please also check out her cookbook, which is called Well Fed. And certainly you will be well fed, because this cookbook has got some epic recipes in it. And also she is the co-author of Living Paleo for Dummies. So if you want to learn more about the paleo diet, or frankly, like we talked about here, just eating the stuff that does the most good for you and least bad to you, check that out. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, remember, this week and every week after, eat more and exercise less, but do that smarter. Talk to you soon.